Okay, now let's talk about comedy. So, moving past tragedy, if we're talking about comedy, it takes an objective viewpoint. So, it's a little bit more like removed from it. It's kind of looking at the situation in an objective way and not like really tied into one side typically. There are lower stakes, right? So, in a tragedy, it's life and death. Right, it's major situations. In comedy, it's a lot lower stakes. It's like, will I get the girl, or will I get my way, or will things kind of work out in this at this party that I'm at? Right, it's a lot lower stakes. It's a complete escape. So usually, where tragedy is like teaching a lesson and like making you examine how people deal with tragedy, comedy is an escape from reality. It kind of takes you out of your real life. It often ridicules human frailty. So looking at like people's fragile egos, or even fragile bodies, or just kind of humans being humans, it kind of ridicules that. And it's a reinforcement of a social norm. So oftentimes comedy will not try to go outside the norm. It will often, stories about comedy will reinforce the social norm, because everyone kind of gets the joke of like, this is the way it's supposed to be, this is normal. And so we all can kind of laugh at the abnormal. It kind of reinforces that idea of the social norm. Comedies will also, there are subtypes of comedy, right? So there are different kinds. So you have a situation comedy, which is, as it suggests, like it emphasizes the humorous qualities of the situation that the characters find themselves in. So if you watch a sitcom, that's where that comes from, right? So situational comedy is like the situation that they get themselves in and how crazy it is. Like, think about an episode of Friends where, somebody had to like hide somebody else so they wouldn't see them, or older sitcoms like Three's Company, where he's living with these women and he has to pretend to be gay. It was a very weird time when that situation was on. But situational comedies are the specific situation that you're in. That's what makes it funny. That's where the humor comes from. A kind of a subtype of that is a farce. So a farce is going to be, that emphasizes broad physical action. So you're like really specializing in the type of comedy of like improvisation, sort of overly ridiculous movement. Slapstick is part of farce. So think about like Three Stooges. That's going to be a farce. So it's like overly like physical comedy, silly behavior. That's going to be a farce. A comedy of character is one where the main character is where all the humor comes from. So specifically, it's driven by its eccentricities of its major character. So if you think again of a sitcom, like if anyone has ever seen the television show Monk, the main Tony Shalhoub is very eccentric and very has weird quirks, and a lot of the humor is driven from him being in different situations and his own eccentricities. So if it's driven by the main character, it's going to be a comedy of character. A comedy of idea is more where you are kind of looking at thought rather than the character or situation. So an example in the textbook is the Greek play Lysistrata, where a lot of the women get together and decide to protest the absurdity of war. They're going to not have sex with their husbands. So the humor comes from that idea. If you look at, like, if you watch a sketch comedy show, if you watch like an SNL or like a late night show, oftentimes the ideas that they're sort of mocking or making fun of is where the humor is going to come from. So a comedy of idea is about a thought, not necessarily from the character. A comedy of manners is where it's like there's a very specific social norm, rigid standard that this is how people operate in the world. And if you are kind of deviating from that, it's going to be a comedy of manners. So you can look at like a play like The Importance of Being Earnest, where it's very like, here is how the social class operates, and these are the movements that are supposed to be happening. And if you kind of deviate from that, that's where the humor comes in. You also have, of course, romantic comedies, which follows the attempts of lovers to get together. And it often gives you like a warm, safe feeling, right? So it's like a uplifting. It may not just be only funny, but situations are going to come up that's going to make it difficult for them to get together, and they're always going to end in a happy way. So it kind of gives you feelings of joy and love and warmth in addition to humor. So those are kind of different categories of comedy, and so you can all kind of think of how different ones are used for different occasions or different viewpoints. There is also comedy in tragedy sometimes, so that can be either a completely separate genre, like we'll talk about a tragic comedy, or there could just be a use of comic relief. So sometimes in tragedies, there will be like one character who's there to break up the tension, right? So maybe there will be some comic relief within a tragic story. So there's moments of comedy that you can find there. There's also a tragicomedy, which is another genre. It is comic and tragic are equally mixed, and it's a serious action, but usually a happy ending, and there's oftentimes a mixed tone. So if you're sort of like, what am I watching? Is this a comedy? Is this a tragedy? Is it kind of both? That's a tragicomedy, right? It's blending both genres together. I think about the movie Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. I don't know if anyone has seen that movie, but it kind of has a very mixed tone. It's sort of horrible, dark, but then it's funny. It's like a dark comedy. It's sort of both things, right? So they're tragedy mixed in with humor. So it's a tragic comedy. It's a mixed tone. So those are the different areas that we're going to talk about. And the last one is melodrama, which I am going to link a video into this folder that I think really does explain melodrama quite well. But some bits about melodrama, their emotions of fear and hate. They focus on what happens. It's fast-paced action and suspense. There's a lot of discovery and reversal in a melodrama, and there's a really spectacular climax in a melodrama. So I recommend that you watch that video to watch kind of more information about melodrama and how there's a morality there. There's a conflict between good and evil. There's poetic justice, right, where like someone gets what they deserve, and it can deal with serious issues, or not always. So make sure you watch that video to learn more about melodrama, and of course read the chapter to kind of get a more in-depth understanding.